Hello, I'm talking to Jeff Waldin, who is the Libertarian candidate for the U.S. Senate. He's running against incumbent Tom Cotton and Democratic challenger Haley Schaffner. And we'll be deciding this election in November.
That's right. Thanks for having me here.
Well, thanks for coming, sir. Tell folks a little bit about yourself and why anybody should vote for you to be one of the 100.
Okay, sure. So thanks for having me on. My name's Jeff Waldin. As you said, I'm the Libertarian candidate running for U.S. Senate. And I'm a Christian, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a businessman, an engineer, and an entrepreneur. And I'm in this race because I feel like I can make a difference. I've had a lot of experience working in the community and starting businesses and working my way up in big companies and working on big complicated issues. And I think the issues facing the federal government right now are big and complex. And I think that folks are tired of the two-party system. They're certainly tired of Tom Cotton, and maybe don't want to flip back over to the other party that was in charge last time and didn't fix everything. And so I think people are looking for a more centrist option in the middle, and that's why I'm running as a third-party candidate.
Okay, you've run several successful businesses, as I recall. Could you name a few of them?
Yeah, sure. So I've worked at Caterpillar, Capital One, and Walmart, specifically Sam's Club. I ran membership for them for a number of years. And I've started a consulting business that I operate now. I consult on strategy and marketing and membership model businesses. I had a product development company before I started working at Sam's Club. That's actually how I got started working with them. They hired me as a contractor to develop a new fuel pricing strategy for them. And then later on, I ended up working in membership for them. And also briefly started a RV timeshare business, but that unfortunately didn't take off. And right after business school, I started what was the country's largest junkyard at one point. So me and two of my co-founders started a business we licensed the database of 1,000 junkyards all over the country and put a website and a call center on top of it so that insurance companies and body shops could find used auto parts more easily. So I've had a lot of different zigs and zags in my career.
Okay. That junkyard experience may turn in particularly helpful if you win this election. Now, sir, I know that your whole point of your campaign as a Libertarian is to break or try to at least change the duopoly between the Republicans and the Democrats. I understand that. But the partisan balance in the Senate's pretty close right now. It's a long shot, but it's at least theoretically possible that if you got elected, you could choose who the majority party would be.
Yep.
Who would you caucus with?
I would caucus with Arkansans.
Okay.
So I think that's one of the nice things about running as a third party, as a Libertarian, as more of an independent, is that I'm not beholden to any party. I'm not beholden to the Republican Party. I'm not beholden to the Democratic Party. I can vote left, right, or center in whatever the interest of Arkansans and Americans. And when you think about how the Republicans and the Democrats have to vote, along party lines, when someone is running for office as a Democrat or a Republican, they can tell you they're independent, they can tell you whatever they want to tell you, but once they get to DC, they're going to have to vote along party lines. And that really diminishes the power that they have in DC, to your point about caucusing. Whereas somebody who's in the middle, somebody who's independent, can often be the deciding vote, because kind of as you were alluding to in your question, each party is going to come to the independents to try to get them to be the tiebreaker and get to be the swing vote. So frankly, I think that with myself as more of a centrist and independent, I'd have more power in DC than somebody who was aligned with either party.
So am I accurately summarizing one of your main campaign things when I say, look, if you're not hurting anybody and you're not breaking the law, the government ought to leave you alone?
Yes.
That's pretty much it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a core libertarian principle, right? Is that you should live your life your way, and me and my family, we should live our life our way. And how we choose to live our life, and the hobbies we have and the decisions we make are our business, and they're not our neighbor's business, and they're certainly not the government's business. And that extends into the main theme of my candidacy, which is that the two parties have us warring with each other over culture war issues all of the time. They try to get us to hate one another so that they think that the problems in our lives are due to our neighbor. Well, they're not due to our neighbor. They're due to the government and the system that they've created. And so that's why I'm in this race, is to focus on the economic issues that affect all of us, regardless of what our cultural differences are. Our shared economic interests are the most important. And that's what DC should be focused on, is fixing those things that affect all of us, and not these culture war issues and trying to pit neighbor against neighbor.
I understand what you're saying, but Arkansas is a very socially conservative state. I
Sure.
mean, the constituency is. So aren't those culture war issues, rightly or wrongly, what a lot of Arkansas voters are concerned about? Or should they be afraid that you're going to vote against their principles if you get elected?
I don't think so. I think Arkansans have a broad swath of positions on various cultural issues. I mean, you're right, it is a conservative, and I'm conservative on a lot of issues. But a third of Arkansans consider themselves independents. So that actually is a very large block, and I think they're unhappy with having to choose Team Red or Team Blue, and so I'm trying to give them an option there. And also, even though Arkansas is very conservative, I think a lot of those conservatives are not happy with Tom Cotton. I mean, in his primary, he got 80% of the vote, but that's 20% of the people, in the primary who are the most conservative, who are showing up to the primary, who did not vote for him. And also overall in Arkansas, his approval rating is underwater. 42% approve of him, but 44% disapprove. And also, I think there's a lot of conservatives who feel like Tom Cotton is not a true constitutional conservative. He blocked the Press Act, which is important to folks like you as a journalist. He's obviously for big government. He's for big spending and deficits and debt. He's very hawkish, and he's for wars of aggression that are not solving any problems for us. And he's clearly not too concerned about the Fourth Amendment, with things like Section 702 and FISA. If you want to look through the private records of an American, you need to get a warrant. So I think there's a lot of folks who are conservative and are not happy with their choices right now, and potentially would be more happy with me, because I'm definitely a fiscal conservative and a constitutional conservative.
Bit of a leading question, but Congress isn't exactly, I don't even remember the last time they passed a real budget, and such as that. And what would you do? What could you do as not one of either team to bring some fiscal responsibility?
Sure. So the first thing we need is a balanced budget amendment. It's unacceptable that every state has to balance their budget, but the federal government does not. And so, you saw with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the government raises about $5 trillion a year in revenue, while the budget was $7 trillion. So that's a $2 trillion deficit. Adding to the debt, that gets us to $39 trillion. And that's just not acceptable, because that is a burden that's going to have to be borne by our children and grandchildren, and it's unfair to them, for them to be paying for our lack of fiscal discipline today. And when you hear about the incumbents in Congress, they hem and haw about the debt and the deficit, but they're certainly not doing anything about it. The Republicans like to consider themselves the party of fiscal conservatism, but they certainly are not. They are running up these deficits and running up these debts, and it's reckless, and it's risky, and it's going to have a real impact on American economics down the road. And you'll hear them too talk about, well, what are the things that are driving the deficit and the debt? And it is the big entitlement programs, namely healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. But are they proposing things to solve those problems? No, they're not. And I have So what I would do once in Congress would be to attack those things specifically. Try to get a balanced budget amendment passed. Work on health care. So we pay 3 times as much as other developed countries for health care. We spend about $15,000 a year per person versus $5,000 a year in, say, Canada or the UK or Japan or Australia or whatever. So if we're paying 3 times as much, we certainly could cut the cost of health care in half and probably still cover everyone. And that's what we should do. And on Social Security, Social Security is paid for by payroll taxes, which are the most regressive taxes. A young person coming right out of school or starting their career, they're paying 15% right off the top to pay for the retirement and the health care of their grandparents. And that, to me, seems backwards. If what I'll work on is expanding children's investment accounts, because all the people that are wealthy, most of them got wealthy by owning stocks. And I think we need to give, help everybody with the boost the day they're born, kind of like what Trump is doing with the $1,000 accounts, but I would increase those. And if we could start everybody off with $10,000, and maybe that's an interest-free loan that folks pay back later, that $10,000 would grow to $5 million by the time you're 65. And the way Social Security works today is you put in about $400,000 over the course of your life to get $400,000 out when you retire. And that's a terrible deal. You would have been better putting that money in a CD in your local bank. So, going back to my background and my business focus, I am just in this race to solve problems and make life better for the working class and the middle class folks.
Let's talk a little bit about Northwest Arkansas.
Sure.
We've got some serious infrastructure needs.
That's right.
Not just roads, but wastewater, water. Well, you live here.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what I'm talking about. We hired, or the Northwest Arkansas Council hired some pretty high-powered experts to come in and tell us what we need to do, and they flat out said, look, the days of the government of the federal government or the state government coming in and giving you the money you need, that isn't going to happen.
Sure.
I mean, I could find the quote where they say that.
Yeah.
So yeah, budget situation which you just described, what can be done? Anything you could do if you were in the Senate about this?
Well, to your point, I think those problems need to be solved locally.
Okay.
And so local municipalities can, pass a tax to pay for water and sewer and other infrastructure that they need. They can pass legislation to issue a bond to raise money to fix that infrastructure. And you're right, the federal government. I think a lot of people think that the federal government just has this magical pool of money. Well, the government doesn't have any money. It's our money, right? It's our money that we gave to the federal government, and now we're asking to have that money back. And so it's either our money, or they're borrowing the money, which is bad, or they're printing the money, which is very bad. So it's not like there's some magical pot of money in D.C. that we're all clamoring for. We're clamoring for the money that we gave them in the first place, or we're clamoring for each other's money, which I don't think makes much sense. I don't think Arkansans want to send money to New York or Florida or California or Washington State or Texas or wherever to pay for their infrastructure. And so why should we expect them to give us money to pay for our infrastructure? And that just also goes to my point about how the federal government has just gotten too big. We're paying all of these taxes to go to the federal government, and then we go to the federal government and beg to get our money back to fix our infrastructure. Well, what if we just didn't pay so much taxes to the federal government in the first place? Then we would have that money to spend with our local government or with our state government. And as I alluded to earlier, state governments have to balance their budgets every year. The federal government does not. So if we keep the money, and not just the money, but the decision-making local, I think we'll all end up with better outcomes. Let's keep things local.
Okay. Getting back to your point of look, if you're doing fine and you're not hurting anybody else, the government should leave you alone.
Yeah.
Does that apply to someone who, for instance, crossed the U.S. border and didn't do it legally?
No, so that is that's not an American citizen who's not bothering anyone. You know,
Okay.
we have laws for a reason. And if I was to show up on the Canadian border and, you know, and I was for some reason not authorized to enter, I would not expect them to allow me to enter. And if I did
Okay.
enter somehow and, you know, later on was trying to find a job and they realized I wasn't a citizen, I would expect them to escort me politely without any chaos or cruelty, you know, back to the border. And they would say, you know, thank you for visiting. You know, please come back again one day and visit us again legally.
Do it
and,
right.
and we'll be glad to have you. Yeah. I mean, look, we are a nation of immigrants, and immigrants to a person, you know, are pretty incredible. You know, especially when you think about some of these folks who are, you know, crossing the Darien Gap on foot. You know, going all through Central and South America on trains with almost no money and getting beaten up and robbed along the way. And then to come to a country where they don't speak the language and, you know, work 2 jobs for less than minimum wage and live in a house with 3 other people and whatever meager money they make, they still send half of it home. I mean, that is an incredible person. Now that can be true, and it can also be true that it's not okay for us just to let an unlimited number of people across the border. And the reason for that is, again, back to my focus on the working class. When we have unrestricted immigration, it has a real effect on American workers. It puts upward pressure on unemployment, and it puts downward pressure on wages. So for example, let's say I was getting my house painted, right? And I get 3 bids, and you give me a bid, and your workers are American, and you're paying them minimum wage and giving them health care and a 401k and whatever else, you're playing by the rules, but your competition has labor that's undocumented. Well, they're going to be able to undercut you. Well, that's not fair. That's not fair to you and your business as a business owner, and it's not fair to the folks that are working for you, and trying to make a decent wage. So anyway, both of these things can be true. Like we can respect immigrants. We should definitely have legal pathways. My in-laws are refugees from Laos after the American-Vietnam War. They were caught up in the CIA secret war over there, and my father-in-law was a child soldier. And so we had a refugee program for those folks because they helped us fight that war. So we should have refugee programs. My wife and I volunteer with Canopy, the local refugee organization, and we donate to them. So we need legal pathways, for immigrants and for refugees, but it should not be, just an uncontrolled, situation where their borders are open, because that has real consequences on American workers.
I understand what you're saying. I mean, basically, stop me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but basically, as far as illegal immigration goes, sounds like you're more an ounce of prevention than a pound of cure.
Yeah, I think that's
guy.
right. I think that's right.
Yeah.
And also, so talking about ICE for a minute, right? So
Please do.
We don't need to have chaos and cruelty to, get undocumented folks to leave our country. And, and some on the left will say, well, we need to abolish ICE. Well, okay, I understand that you're upset about the tactics, and we should not have these cruel tactics. But we do need immigration and customs enforcement. And we do need to deport folks that are, not here illegally, particularly if they're causing harm to anyone. And, think about the Obama administration, for example. So Obama deported more people in each of his 2 terms than Trump did during his first term. So, when folks on the left say that they're not, for any, when they want to abolish ICE, well, they have to remember back to their own president when, we were deporting people that were not here legally.
Correct me if I'm misstating you again, but it sounds like immigration policy is a pretty good example of what you're talking about how people are tired of the extremes, about how the parties drive each other to extremes.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Yeah, on the right, you've got folks who want chaos and cruelty and political theater in the streets, and I don't think that's necessary. And also, when you have those aggressive tactics, you start violating the constitutional rights of American citizens, as we saw. But similarly, yeah, also on the left, we shouldn't have open borders. And so, that's why I'm running in the middle, because I think the most logical solutions are in the middle. And that's where we were as a country for a lot of years. Before the camera started rolling, we were talking about newspapers and how people now can get their media from any source.
Yeah.
And, since the dawn of the internet, folks have definitely gotten more polarized. And, I think, my conservative friends think I'm probably too liberal, and my liberal friends think I'm too conservative. And I think that's a sign that maybe I'm thinking about things the right way, because there's a lot of folks that are unhappy with where the right has gone further to the right. But I tell my friends on the left that the answer is not a more polarized solution that's further to the left. The correct answers are still in the middle.
Okay. Oh, in my job, you have to do a fair amount of research, and I'll put it this way: most people have a mix of conservative beliefs and what would be characterized as liberal beliefs. There's not there's very few purists on either end. And what you're promising to do if you get elected, as I understand it, is to be rational, to pick the best policy choice, whatever the circumstances are.
100%.
Now, this is not the first office you've run for, if I remember correctly. What else have you tried to do?
That's right. I ran for Justice of the Peace in Benton County back in 2018, and then I also ran for City Council in Bentonville once. You run as an independent there, so I was not running as a libertarian in that.
Yeah, it's nonpartisan.
Right, exactly. I had to go around and just collect my own signatures to get on the ballot for that one. But it was a 5-way race, so it was that was a pretty complicated one.
Pretty complicated race. The rest of now, they have challengers, okay? The incumbents in the Arkansas delegation have challengers. But as of this red-hot moment, it's an all-Republican delegation. We've talked about you working in Congress. Do you think you can work with the people in this delegation?
Sure.
And with the Republican governor and very Republican legislature? It's almost a supermajority.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to work with anybody. I don't really care what their political stripe is, and there'll probably be a lot of things that we agree on, and we can work together on, and there'll probably be some other things where we have some differences, and that's okay. Like the housing bill, for example, that was passed by Congress and is waiting for President Trump to sign. That was a bipartisan bill.
Yeah.
And that's an example of bipartisanship in one of the most polarized Congresses we have. And so, me being in the middle, I think I'll be able to find a lot of compromise with both sides.
Okay. Now I understand running as a libertarian, you sort of declared your independence, so to speak, such as that. But have you been a libertarian all your adult life, or did you incline towards one party or the other?
I would say I've been an independent my whole life. I voted for Republicans and Democrats and Libertarians and Independents. I definitely have been libertarian leaning all of my life, just in the sense that I feel like people should be able to live their life their way. That's their business. But at the same time, I think the government should, we should have fiscal conservatism, and the government should do what the government, what was laid out in the Constitution. And I think there's a natural inclination for the government to get larger, and for whatever party is in charge to use the government to impose their will on the other side. And I'm not really interested in imposing my will on anyone. I just want the government to operate efficiently and to provide the services that we all need, regardless of political stripe.
What are some of those? What would be your big issues if you came to it? What would be the things? What do the voters, what do the people, not just the voters, the people of Arkansas most urgently need?
Sure. So I think in Arkansas, it was interesting. I went to the Little Rock Chamber of Commerce meeting a couple of weeks ago, and Rex Nelson was there talking about America 250 and sort of the state of Arkansas, where's Arkansas going in the next 50 years. And he painted a really rosy picture, because there are some pockets of Arkansas that are doing very well. Northwest Arkansas, Little Rock has got a lot of investment. There was just an investment by Bezos the other day. Fort Smith is doing well with the F-35 training. Camden's doing well with the industrial. Mississippi County with steel. So there's a lot of parts of Arkansas that are doing very well. At the same time, we're in the middle of a farm crisis, and that farm crisis is tragic because it has been created by the federal government because of the tariffs and the backlash of the trade war, and because of the hot war that we have in Iran, spiking fuel prices and fertilizer prices. And in the midst of that, the farm bill still hasn't been passed. The last farm bill I think we had was 2018, and that was supposed to expire in 5 years. And so that's 3 years overdue. And some of the price supports have been updated, but we need the comprehensive farm bill passed. And we need the Farm Act passed, which is a right to repair legislation that was written last year, but still hasn't been passed. And in the midst, I'm a libertarian. I'm generally not in favor of bailouts. For example, if banks create a problem for themselves and they need to go under, I think that's fine. But in the case of the farm crisis, that was created by the government.
I see.
And so it's unfair for farmers to have to bear the burden of a crisis created by the government. And so the $10 billion bailout that's been that the Trump administration asked for, that needs to get passed, and the farmers need relief now, because whatever money they're going to get is going to come in arrears, and they need those payments now to keep themselves afloat. And then going forward, obviously we need to not have tariffs. We need to not have these hot wars that are squeezing farmers from both ends. It's a margin business, and they're being squeezed on the input side with rising costs, and they're being squeezed on the output side by loss of some of their markets. And as a businessman, once I get to the Senate, I'm going to spend a lot of my time I'll spend a lot of my time in Arkansas, but I'm going to spend a lot of my time outside of Arkansas, in other states and in other countries, trying to develop new markets for our farming exports, and also our other exports, our manufactured goods. And so I think that's the key for Arkansas, and kind of goes back to what you were saying about the infrastructure investments needed in communities all across the state. Well, we need economic activity. That's the solution. We need a more vibrant economy in all of these economies. So we need farming needs to be healthier. We need more manufacturing. There's some mining and some other things. And I know, a lot of people like the pastoral nature of Arkansas and don't want to, mar the landscape with, some of these industries. And I think that's a fair concern. And I think that's why local control is so important. But we do need some amount of economic activity. And so if one county doesn't want to have, a lithium mine in their backyard or a data center in their backyard, that's fine. But another community might want those things, to help the economic vibrancy of their community. So anyway, again, I think it's one of those examples of it's not either or, right? We can bring industry into the state and create the economic conditions that we need to raise the tax base and collect the money that we need for infrastructure. And I think, as a centrist, that's what I'd be focused on.
Rising tide lifting all boats, so to speak.
Right, exactly.
You were very clear about your distinction between the farm bailout and other government bailouts, other government bailouts you oppose in generally. I just want to make it explicit. It's one thing when any sector of business makes a high-risk gamble and loses.
Sure.
That's their fault. It's another thing when the government makes not just one bad decision, but a series of bad decisions, and it hurts a sector.
Yep.
The government ought to make good on that, if I understood you correctly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, somebody who's farming soybeans or rice or what have you, to your point, they didn't make a risky decision. They were getting up every morning, working hard, repairing their equipment, running their business. Yeah, the reason they're in the situation they're in is not because of some risk they took. It's a risk and bad decisions that the federal government made.
I understand, and not to tell old stories, but I used to be the row crop agriculture reporter
Oh, okay.
in Little Rock, and I used to joke that the commodity market was invented because the weather was too predictable. Agriculture is a pretty high-risk business
Yeah.
to begin with, and then. But you bring up another point that I want to talk about, and that is prices. Apparently, if there's one issue every voter everywhere believes in strongly, it's that things are just too high.
Mm-hmm.
Can anything bring prices down besides competition?
Yeah, I think there are some things that we should do. And by the way, I'm gonna circle back to that competition piece because that's very key.
Okay.
But let me start with a couple of government policies.
Okay.
So first of all, we need to end the tariffs, right? Libertarians are big on free markets, and tariffs are not free markets. You know, those are raising prices for us, and obviously, as we talked about a minute ago, creating backlash in terms of the trade wars that we're seeing. So ending tariffs will definitely bring prices down. And that's basically been a tax on us. Ending the war will also bring prices down. And there's a lot to say about why we got into this war and Tom Cotton's fingerprints on that. And it's a very unfortunate history. But we need to extract ourselves from that as quick as we can and get the Strait of Hormuz open to get fuel and fertilizer prices down. Another thing that I don't hear my competition talking about is reform of the Fed. So there are things that the government is doing, like tariffs, that are raising prices. But when the Fed has loose monetary policies, you know, when we go through a recession, there are things, the levers that the Fed can pull to keep us from going deeper into a recession. But when those monetary policies are too loose and they're printing money through mechanisms called quantitative easing and a raft of other things that they call those mechanisms that they use, it eats away at the value of our savings and our paycheck. And that is an invisible hand that's causing inflation to increase. And there are other countries who have more of a hybrid system. I'm not, by the way, suggesting we go back to the gold standard, because that's what caused the Great Depression to last so long. So we do need some flexible monetary policy, but it needs to be more restrained. So ending tariffs and reforming the Fed. Now back to free markets. This is another one where, a lot of folks say, oh, well, if you're a libertarian, you'd think just the corporations are going to solve everything and we should leave them to their own devices. No, that's not exactly true. So libertarians are for free markets, but we are against fraud and government-sponsored corporatism. And what I mean by that is when these industries consolidate to such an extent that they have market power, that's not a free market anymore. An oligopoly is not a free market where corporations in a tightly consolidated industry can operate like a cartel, or when private equity buys up, medical helicopters, or when pharma bros buy up
houses.
Yeah, or houses, exactly, which is one of the things that's actually in the housing bill that's waiting to be signed. Or when pharma bros buy up the supply of insulin and 10x the price. That is not free markets, and that is libertarians are not for that, and I'm not for that. And so that's one of the things I talk about on the campaign trail is we need to actually stand up to the corporations and change the rules in favor of working people. And by the way, I know the Democrats are quite angry at corporations and billionaires, and I share a lot of that anger. Where I differ with them is the solution. And the solution that I see with the classic democratic solution is solving everything with money, right? So, oh, you need some education, let me give you some money for that. You need some healthcare, let me give you some money for that. You need some, farming is in a bad spot, let me give you some money for that. Well, where does that money go? It just goes right back to the corporations. And the corporations have designed themselves. They know where the money is coming from. They know that bailout money is coming. And so they'll gladly pick all those things up. I mean, I worked at Sam's Club during the pandemic, and we sold a lot of TVs when the government was handing out money. And so the corporations know how to pick that money up. And so we have to go in and break up some of this consolidation and change the rules, to get the cost down. Healthcare is a great example, as I was talking about earlier. Again, and libertarians get mad at me about this because, in the case of healthcare, I'm actually calling for more government intervention to control prices. But healthcare is just a very different service than a lot of other services where you can compare prices, more transparently.
It's a live or die issue, for one thing.
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
A quality, and even if you live, it's a quality of life issue.
Yeah, the thing about healthcare, there's sort of some unique things about healthcare, right? So, number one is, if you need healthcare, I can't help you with that. If you need food or clothing or shelter, I can help you with that. But I cannot give you heart surgery. I cannot whip up some insulin for you in my kitchen. The other thing about healthcare is that it's somewhat self-regulating. If I give you $100 to spend on education or food or whatever, maybe that's what you'll spend it on. I don't know. Maybe you'll spend it on something else. But if you need healthcare, well, you're not going to go into a hospital and ask for a surgery that you don't need. If you're sick, you need to get help with that. And then the third thing, it's not fungible, right? So if the government gives you $100, you can give that $100 to me. But if you need heart surgery, you can't give your heart surgery to me, right? So there are some very unique things about healthcare where, I think it does make sense for the government to get involved to get the prices down and make sure that we all have healthcare, because it's just cruel to have folks out there, particularly working people, who either don't have healthcare or having to spend way too much for it.
Drill down on that. How would the government? How would you like if you could say, okay, Congress, pass this?
Sure.
What would you have them pass?
So to me, the solution with healthcare is to look at analogous models where there are public-private partnerships. So, for example, public utilities. Public utilities are a natural monopoly, but we're all getting power, and it's all fairly decently priced. It's been going up here a bit lately, but the power companies are regulated by the states so that they can't take advantage of their monopoly power and just charge whatever they want. But the transmission lines are still getting built. The folks, working at the linemen are still getting paid. The folks in the accounting office at Carroll Electric are still getting paid. The executives are still getting paid $1 million a year or more. Like the electric utilities are doing fine, and consumers are getting a fairly priced product. Another example is crop insurance. So the crop insurance is regulated by the federal government, by the FCIC. And so if you're a farmer, if you're buying your crop insurance from a farm bureau or from some interstate crop insurance company, it is the same policy. The price that you're paying and the benefits that you get are set by the federal government. You're just picking between insurance companies based on the service that they're giving you. So I think that's also a great example of a corollary that we could follow for health insurance, for healthcare, is to say, look, like here are the prices that we're going to set, and we shouldn't be paying more for drugs or more for procedures in this country than folks are in other countries. And if that means that the CEO of Mercy Healthcare, which is a Christian nonprofit hospital, is only going to make $1 million a year instead of $15 million a year, I'm okay with that.
Okay. Sorry for the sudden jump to another topic, but you mentioned utilities, and that did remind me, data centers have become a hot button thing. But if I put this in context from what you said earlier, if a local community wants a data center near them, that's fine. And if another local community doesn't want a data center near them, that's fine too. Do I understand you correctly on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And now, of course, that's more of a state issue than a federal issue.
Right.
But yeah, I do have an opinion on it. And my opinion is that it should be up to local control. And if folks don't want a data center in their backyard, either because it's too big and ugly, or it's using up all their water, or it's raising their electric bill, then they should be able to say no to that. And those things are legislatable too, right? So, and those are the three main issues with data centers, right? The space that they're using and what they look like, the power and the water. Well, the power, if they're going to increase transmission demands on the utility for the power that they need,
Yeah.
they should pay for that transmission expansion, not the ratepayers, the consumers, and the households. If the increase in the cost of power is coming because of a data center, the data center should cover that cost. So that's the power issue. And then the second issue is water. So right out of college, I worked for Caterpillar for a number of years on backup generators and industrial engines and things like that, cogeneration, peak shaving, and things like that. Well, those machines, for the most part, all have closed loop cooling systems. And so we could pass a law that says data centers have to have closed loop cooling systems. They cannot have evaporative cooling system that are pulling millions of gallons of water from the municipal water supply. That's not acceptable. And so if you solve the power piece and the water piece, you're just left with the real estate piece, basically. And again, if a local community thinks that that's unsightly, then that's fine. But other communities, they might be fine with it, because a data center is about the size of a Walmart distribution center, and we have a lot of those all over the state, you know, and we've got, you know, other buildings, chicken houses and whatnot. So it's not unprecedented that we have large buildings, you know, in the state for different industries.
They do, for the people near them, the noise is also a consideration, but there's things you can do to dampen that.
Sure, right.
But yeah, but anyway. All right then. Sir, you've been answering the heck out of my questions. What am I skipping or glossing over here that should be addressed?
Yeah, no, I think you've asked all the questions that kind of get to the heart of my campaign. You know, again, like my main focus is, number one, just uniting Arkansas families, working people around our shared economic interests, and not really interested in the culture wars. And secondly, just defending personal liberties, letting people live their life their way. It's, you know, it's not the government's business to pry or tell you how you should live your life. And then expanding broad-based prosperity for all of us, you know, particularly for the folks, you know, in the working class and the middle class. Those 80% of us in the middle who are above the poverty line but not millionaires, you know, we're the ones who are doing all the work, paying all the taxes, requiring the least benefits from anyone, and not bothering anyone. And the system is not designed for us anymore. You know, I think the right is focused on the top and the left is focused on the bottom. And, you know, people talk about making America great again. Well, I think that's a great idea. But when were we great? We were great when we were focused on the middle class. And if we focus on the middle class and we also focus on young people and their future, if we focus on those two things, to me, everything else will work out fine. You know, the rich folks will still be just fine, and folks who are in poverty will have a more viable opportunity to get into the middle class and make a healthy living and not be so dependent on government benefits.
So the most good for the most people is
100%.
what it sounds like.
Yes,
Really?
absolutely.
Okay. Oh, let's see. Sir, I think we're dangerously close to done.
Okay.
Oh, as a matter of fact, thank you for coming. And like you say, on the healthcare thing, you don't even toe the Libertarian Party line, do you?
That's right. Yeah, like I tell people, I'm not beholden to any ideology, left, right, center, libertarian, or otherwise. I am libertarian leaning, and I am running on the libertarian ticket, but at the end of the day, I'm a pragmatist at heart, and we just have to go with the solutions that, you know, data says are working for people.
That's true, but I'll put it this way. The political donor money usually goes to the red or the blue.
Correct.
Okay. It can't be easy to run a I mean, I don't see Waldin TV commercials when I'm flipping channels. You see what I'm saying?
That's right.
So as a practical matter, you know, how do you campaign?
Yeah, so I am doing some advertising, but it's mostly digital, you know, online advertising with Facebook and TikTok and YouTube and things like that. And I am touring the whole state, so I'm slowly making my way through every county. And that's been great, being out on the campaign trail and meeting folks. So I'm getting and doing interviews like this. So I'm trying to get my name out there any way that I can, even though you're right, I don't have a big advertising budget and I don't have dark money, super PACs backing me and sending nasty mailers and making nasty ads about my opponents. But also, I think people are just looking for a change, and I don't know that I necessarily need to spend a lot of money to make that case. And also, I think people are tired of the left and the right telling voters who to vote against and catering to their fear. I'm in this race to give people someone to vote for.
You've been around the state and you've met people you haven't met before. Been to parts of the state you may not have been to before. What has the campaign so far taught you?
The campaign so far has taught me that these folks in these local communities, they know what's best for them. They know what's best for their local community. And also just the camaraderie and the sense of community in these towns and counties across the state. Everybody is just so warm and welcoming and hardworking, and again, they know what's best for their community. And so that's why in this campaign I talk a lot about let's keep the money and the decision making local. People can take care of their neighbors and they can work together to solve the problems that they have in their communities, whether it's their infrastructure or their schools or whatever it is. They know what's best for them.
Okay. I tried to stick to Arkansas in this interview, but I do have to get back. One thing of particular interest, a little personal privilege here. You mentioned that let's end this war with Iran. Let's get the strait open. Would you be willing to let Iran charge fees on the strait, get it open, get the traffic flowing again?
Well, that would definitely not be optimal, but it just all depends on what leverage we have and versus what they have. And also, by the way, now that they know they have that power, it's kind of hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube, whereas before the strait was open and they were not tolling it. But yeah, I think we've just gotten ourselves into this intractable mess now where we were, we had a ceasefire and now we don't have a ceasefire. So it's going to be a mess, to get out of this. But I think to me, the most important thing is to reflect on how we got here and who are the people that are in power today and what are the decisions that they made along the way that got us to this point in the first place. So when you think about the JCPOA that was negotiated by an earlier administration in 2015, Tom Cotton was the one who led the effort to write a letter to the Iranian regime.
I remember that.
Telling them that because it was an executive order, it could be, canceled by a future administration, which I'm sure that they knew. And can you imagine how infuriated Tom Cotton would be if the Democrats tried to interfere with the current negotiations? So it's just unbelievable, that he did that. And then, of course, when in Trump's first term, that agreement was torn up in 2018 and replaced with nothing other than sanctions. There was no new agreement put in place. Well, under the JCPOA, it was not a perfect agreement. I will agree with that. But it was doing the thing that it was meant to do, which was constrain their nuclear materials with inspectors on the ground. And so they got rid of 98% of their fissile material. They got down to about 300 kilograms, I want to say it was, at 4% enrichment. After we tore up that deal, they got to 10,000 kilograms of nuclear material, enriched to 60%. That happened because of the decisions that Tom Cotton made. And so then, we bombed their facility last year, and then we started this war over that. So, Tom Cotton is out there saying that we need to be in this war. Well, arguably, he's the one most responsible for precipitating the need for the war in the first place. And so I'm not sure what all the answers are to get us out of this mess that's been caused by the current leadership in D.C., but what I can definitely tell you is we need to get rid of the people that have such terrible judgment that got us into this situation in the first place.
Okay, sir. Well, that's, like I say, it didn't kind of a surprise note to end on, but I thought you ended it well. You addressed it well. Anything else? I'll let you have the last word. You go right ahead. Anything?
Yeah, no, that's basically it. I would just encourage voters to get out to the polls. Arkansas does have very secure elections, but we don't have enough people voting, and we need to get more people voting. We need to get folks off the sideline, engaged in the democratic process, and that's a big part of the reason that I'm running. I think, are there more than 51% of people who are frustrated with Tom Cotton and want to vote him out? Yes, I think so. Will all of those people vote for a Democrat? Probably not. And that's why I'm in this race, is to give people a third option, to give people an option for rational solutions in the middle, and to build a coalition that's bigger than just the Democrats. Because to defeat Tom Cotton, we're also going to need libertarians, independents, disengaged voters that we're trying to get off the sidelines, and center-right conservatives that are just disappointed with the direction of the current GOP and Tom Cotton. And that's the coalition that I'm trying to build, and I think I've got a real path to victory in November.
Mr. Waldin, thank you for your time. You've been very generous with it.
Well, thank you for having me.
We appreciate it.
I appreciate being here.